Hi, I'm David Liew, reporting from busy Barcelona for EULAR 2025 for Room Now. It's been a great meeting. Lots of interesting stuff today. I want to tell you a little bit about JAK inhibitors and some of the stuff that's been going on, the latest from the JAK-pot study as well. So I was part of a great session with Andreas Kirschbaumer and Kim Lauper, going through a little bit about where JAK inhibitors are going. Andreas, who's been heavily involved in the two sets of points to consider on the use of JAK inhibitors that you'll have put out, had a lot to talk about the new avenues that JAK inhibitors might be explored in, certainly beyond the indications that we're used to, and thinking about things like GCA, PMR, lupus, Sjogren's disease, even things like Vexus. And he really went through the data beautifully. It was lovely to see, actually, that even though there were some fears, I think, that oral surveillance would lead to the end of the drug development pipeline and JAK inhibitors, that's been far from the case. Uh, Kim really went through beautifully the oncology risk from JAK inhibitors, where some of the upsides potentially could be, some of the plausible mechanisms. It really was a masterclass. But I think all of that underlies the idea that maybe we've got over the shock of oral surveillance. We've started to know how to process this all a little bit better. And in here in Europe, it's been interesting to see how the response has been to rheumatoid arthritis prescribing for JAK inhibitors versus other therapies, and how that's gone in amongst new entrants to the market, as well as EMA warnings, as well as the release of the oral surveillance results. And so there's a really interesting poster from the JAK-pot collaborative on the floor, poster 0150, which detailed a lot of those things. The JAK-pot collaborative, of course, is multiple national rheumatoid arthritis registries, which band together to look at the utilization and outcomes from JAK inhibitors in rheumatoid arthritis. In this poster, they looked a little bit about the overall utilization in the markets that they serve, and to what extent we've been using more or less of different JAK inhibitors and how that's all played out. And some really interesting data, because it showed, for starters, that well and truly before the release of the oral surveillance results, our use of tofacitinib was really leveling out and, if anything, declining here in Europe. And I think that was largely supplanted by, firstly, baricitinib, then upadacitinib, which has continued to grow. Maybe it would have grown more sharply if it wasn't for oral surveillance, but certainly the utilization in absolute terms has continued to grow. So I think that gives us an idea that, of course, despite the EMA warning, despite the regulatory limits on how we might use JAK inhibitors, that we are using more of JAK inhibitors, and that's probably appropriate. That I can't say for certain off the basis of those broad numbers, but it would be appropriate for the utilization to increase. Clearly, there are a lot of patients out there in whom, even within the EMA warning, the use of JAK inhibitors in rheumatoid arthritis would be appropriate. And it makes sense that we're not going too far one way or the other. We're not using them with reckless abandon, and at the same time, we're not using them. There's not a chilling effect on our use of JAK inhibitors, and we're not inappropriately withholding them from patients who would benefit from them. So I guess that's a balance of it all. It's always really interesting to see how this plays out in different parts of the world. We can see actually in the UK and in Australia, there's been more of a chilling effect from the regulatory warning, or certainly at least a decrease in utilization of the regulatory warning. And it would be very interesting to compare that to the United States. For plenty more on rheumatoid arthritis, JAK inhibitors, and everything rheumatology, you know what to do. Go down to rheumnow.com.